That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had been falling steady for hours, turning the cracked asphalt outside Millie's diner into a slick mirror of gray sky. It was the kind of downpour that soaked through jackets and chilled bones, the drops drumming on the tin roof like impatient fingers. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and grease, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly over formica counters worn smooth by years of weary hands. Ellie hunched over her notebook in the corner booth, her pencil scratching faint lines across the page, sketches of birds, maybe, or faces she imagined freer than her own. She was 16, all sharp angles and shadowed eyes, the kind of girl who carried silence like a shield. Across the diner, behind the register, her mother, Sarah, wiped down the counter with mechanical swipes. Sarah's hands trembled just enough to notice if you were paying attention, her smile thin and practiced for the truckers who trickled in for black coffee and pie. She hadn't slept well. The bruise on her wrist was hidden under her sleeve, a fresh mark from the night before. Her husband, Ellie's stepfather Roy, had come home late again, his voice booming through the thin walls of their trailer like thunder. Roy worked the mill on the edge of town, his temper as jagged as the saw blades he handled. No one at the diner asked questions. Small towns like this one, tucked off Highway 17 in the Rust Belt hollows of Pennsylvania, had a way of swallowing secrets whole. The bell above the door jingled sharply, cutting through the patter of rain. Ellie looked up first, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. A group of men filed in, their boots heavy on the linoleum, water pooling at their feet. They were the road wolves, 36 of them, though not all came inside at once. Leather vests patched with a snarling wolf's head, faded jeans, and the faint scent of engine oil and wet road clinging to them like a second skin. They weren't strangers to Millie's. The diner sat at the crossroads where their routes converged, a neutral ground for coffee and quiet talk. Led by Jax, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that held the weight of too many miles, they claimed the long counter without a word, their voices a low rumble under the storm. Jax nodded to Sarah as he settled onto a stool, his calloused hands folding around a mug she poured without asking. He'd been riding with the wolves for 20 years, since the army spit him out after Desert Storm with shrapnel scars and nightmares that woke him in motel parking lots. The Brotherhood wasn't just bikes and runs. It was the only family that hadn't fractured under pressure. They kept to themselves mostly, fixing up old Harleys in a garage on the outskirts, sharing stories around campfires that burned low and hot. But today, something felt off in the air, thicker than the humidity. Ellie watched them from her booth, her gaze lingering on Jax's steady hands, wondering what it would be like to have men like that in your corner, not tearing you down. Sarah moved between tables, refilling cups, her laughter forced when one of the younger wolves cracked a joke about the weather. But her eyes darted to the window every few minutes, toward the trailer park a half-mile down the road. Roy had called earlier, his voice slurred over the line, demanding she close up early and get home. She'd mumbled excuses, but the fear lingered in the set of her shoulders. Ellie caught it too, the way her mother's fingers tightened on the coffee pot. She closed her notebook, shoving it into her backpack, the weight of unspoken words pressing on her chest. Last night had been worse than usual. Roy's fists had found Ellie's arm when she'd tried to pull him away from Sarah. The mark throbbed under her sleeve, a secret she buried deep. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle, the highway shimmering under sodium lights. The wolves lingered longer than usual, their conversation dipping into murmurs about a run-up to the lake country, but Jax's attention kept drifting to the back booth. He'd noticed Ellie before, the quiet girl with the sketches, always drawing when the diner emptied. There was a haunted look to her, one he recognized from his own daughter's photos. the ones he carried in his wallet before the accident took her 5 years back. A drunk driver, they'd said. Jax had ridden alone for months after, the road his only confessor. Now, with the wolves around him, he felt the pull of something older than loyalty, the instinct to shield what was breaking. As the afternoon wore on, the diner filled with the hum of engines idling in the lot. Not all 36 had come inside. Some waited on their bikes, rain beating on chrome, a silent perimeter forming without fanfare. Sarah glanced out again, her face paling as Roy's battered pickup rumbled into view, mud-splattered and aggressive. He slammed the door, stalking toward the entrance, his face twisted in a scowl that promised storm. Ellie shrank back in her seat, heart pounding against her ribs. The bell jingled once more, but this time it carried menace. Jax's hand stilled on his mug. He exchanged a look with his second Tommy, a wiry veteran with tattoos snaking up his arms from tours in Iraq. No words passed, just a nod, the kind that bound them tighter than blood. Roy burst through the door, his voice already rising, eyes locking on Sarah. "You deaf. I said get home, and you—" He jabbed a finger toward Ellie, crossing the diner in 3 strides. "Pack your shit. We're leaving now." The air thickened, the wolves going still as statues. Ellie's breath caught, her hands trembling on the table's edge. Sarah stepped forward, voice small. "Roy, not here, please." But he ignored her, grabbing Ellie's arm, yanking her up. She winced, a soft gasp escaping, enough to shatter the quiet. In that moment, the diner held its breath. Jax rose slowly, his chair scraping like a warning. The other wolves followed, a wall of leather and resolve forming behind him. Outside, engines roared to life, a chorus that vibrated through the walls. Roy froze, his grip loosening as he took in the scene, the Brotherhood closing ranks, not with shouts or threats, but with the unyielding silence of men who'd seen hell and chosen mercy instead. What happened next would ripple through the town like the rain on the roof, exposing cracks in the facade of safety, forcing choices no one wanted to make. But for Ellie, in that trembling instant, it was the first flicker of something like hope. Roy's fingers dug into Ellie's arm like rusted clamps, the pain sharp enough to blur her vision for a second. She didn't cry out this time, not like last night, when the trailer walls had echoed her stifled sobs. Instead, she bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window as if the highway beyond could swallow her whole. The diner's fluorescent hum seemed louder now, amplifying the thud of her heart against her ribs. Sarah hovered nearby, her coffee pot forgotten in her hand, steam curling up like a plea unspoken. Jax moved first, his boots deliberate on the linoleum, each step echoing the low growl of engines outside. He wasn't a big man by outlaw standards, broad but not towering, his frame carved from years of wrenching engines and riding through dust storms. But there was a gravity to him, a quiet authority that made the air shift. Tommy flanked him, the others fanning out behind like shadows lengthening at dusk. No one drew a weapon. That wasn't their way anymore, not since the club had sworn off the old vendettas after Jax pulled them back from the edge. But their presence filled the space, leather creaking softly, the scent of wet wool and motor oil cutting through the diner's stale warmth. "Easy now," Jax said, his voice low and even, like gravel under tires. He stopped a few feet away, hands open at his sides, palms up. It was a gesture Ellie noticed, the same one her mother used when calming a spooked customer. Roy's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing into slits, his breath coming in hot bursts that fogged the air between them. "Who the hell are you?" Roy spat, his grip on Ellie tightening reflexively. She winced again, a small sound escaping despite her efforts, and Sarah took a half step forward, her face ashen. "They're just customers, Roy. Please let her go." Sarah's voice cracked on the last word, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. The other patrons, 2 truckers nursing coffees at the far end, had gone still, forks hovering mid-air, the clink of silverware silenced. Outside, the roar of bikes swelled, a rhythmic thunder that vibrated the windows. But inside, it was the quiet that pressed down, heavy as the storm clouds rolling off. Roy's laugh was a bark, devoid of humor. Customers? Look like a pack of strays to me. He yanked Ellie closer, her backpack sliding to the floor with a soft thud, notebooks spilling out like secrets laid bare. One page fluttered open, a sketch of a wolf mid-leap, fierce yet graceful, inked with careful strokes. Jax's gaze flicked to it, something softening in his eyes, a flicker of recognition that tugged at the scar tissue around his heart. The wolves didn't advance, but they didn't back down either. Tommy leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his tattoos peeking from under rolled sleeves, faded ink of dog tags and desert sands. He'd lost a brother in Fallujah, the kind of loss that hollowed you out and left you rebuilding with whatever was left. Now, watching Roy's red-knuckled hand on the girl's arm, he felt that old rage stir, tempered by the code Jax had drilled into them. Protect. Don't destroy. Kid's not going anywhere with you like that, Tommy said, his tone flat, eyes locked on Roy's. Roy's face flushed deeper, veins bulging at his temples. He worked the mill shifts that broke lesser men, came home to a bottle and a temper that fed on silence. The town knew him as the guy who fixed what was broken, engines, roofs, grudges, but up close, he was fracture lines waiting to crack. "This is family business," he growled, shoving Ellie toward the door. She stumbled, catching herself on a stool, the metal rattling like loose change. Sarah moved then, placing herself between them, her voice rising for the first time. "Roy, stop. She's done nothing." But he shoved her aside, not hard enough to bruise anew, but enough to send her staggering into the counter. The coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor in a spray of dark liquid and porcelain shards. The sound was sharp, final, like a door slamming on hope. Jax's jaw tightened, a muscle working under his beard. He thought of his daughter then, Lila, with her wild curls and sketches scattered across the kitchen table, gone in a screech of tires on wet pavement. The drunk behind the wheel had walked away with a fine. Jax had ridden into the night, the road blurring until the wolves found him, pulled him back. Now, seeing Ellie's wide eyes, the way she clutched her arm, he felt that pull again. The raw ache of what couldn't be fixed, but could be shielded. "Last chance," Jax said, stepping closer, his voice a murmur that carried the weight of 36 souls outside. The engines idled lower now, a steady pulse, as if the bikes themselves were holding breath. Roy hesitated, his bravado cracking under the collective stare. The wolves weren't yelling, weren't posturing. They were a wall, unmovable, their silence louder than any threat. For a heartbeat, the diner hung suspended, the rain tapping Morse code on the roof, the scent of spilled coffee mingling with tension thick as fog. Roy's hand hovered, then dropped, his shoulders slumping as realization dawned. These weren't drifters. They were a force, rooted in something deeper than the highway. He muttered a curse, backing toward the door, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "This ain't over," he snarled, but the words lacked bite, swallowed by the growing hum outside. Ellie sank onto the stool, her breath coming in shallow gasps, tears tracking silent paths down her cheeks. Sarah knelt to gather the shards, her hands shaking, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Jax knelt too, not touching her, just close enough to offer the steadiness of his presence. "You all right?" he asked softly, his eyes meeting hers. Eyes that had seen too much, but held a spark of the man who'd once built sandcastles with his girl. She nodded, barely, wiping her face with her sleeve. The mark on her arm burned, but for the first time, it felt less like a chain. Tommy retrieved her notebook, handing it back with a nod, the wolf sketch facing up. Outside, the bikes formed a loose circle in the lot, headlights cutting through the drizzle like beacons. As Roy's truck peeled out, spraying gravel, the diner exhaled. The truckers resumed their meals, glances averted, the town's code of looking away intact. But the wolves lingered, ordering more coffee, their conversation resuming in low tones, plans for the run, but laced now with concern for the girl and her mother. Jax watched Ellie sketch again, her pencil moving with tentative strokes, and felt the first stir of purpose beyond the road. The Brotherhood had stepped in, not for glory, but because silence in the face of breaking was no longer an option. What came next would test them all, pulling at old wounds and forging new bonds in the quiet aftermath. The rain had picked up again by the time the sun dipped low, painting the diner's windows in streaks of amber and shadow. Ellie sat at the counter now, her notebook open but untouched, the wolf sketch staring back at her like a guardian she'd drawn into being. Sarah moved behind the grill, flipping burgers with a rhythm that betrayed her nerves, each sizzle a small distraction from the weight pressing on her chest. The wolves had claimed the booths and stools, their leather vests drying in the humid air, but the energy in the room had shifted. No more low rumbles of plans for the road. Instead, quiet conversations laced with glances toward the mother and daughter, the kind of vigilance that didn't need words. Jax leaned against the jukebox in the corner, its neon glow flickering across his face like faulty memories. He nursed a fresh coffee, black as the nights he'd ridden alone after Lila's funeral, the steam rising in lazy curls that blurred the edges of his thoughts. Tommy slid into the seat across from Ellie, not too close, just enough to offer the illusion of normalcy. "Draw that wolf yourself?" he asked, nodding at the page. His voice was rough, scarred by years of shouting over rotors in the desert, but there was a gentleness in it now, like sand smoothed by wind. Ellie glanced up, her fingers tracing the lines she'd etched hours ago. "Yeah, saw your patch. Thought it fit." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased a fraction, the tension uncoiling like a spring held too long. Tommy chuckled softly, a sound that rumbled low without mocking. "Fits us, all right. Pack sticks together." He didn't push. Instead, he pulled a worn photo from his wallet, a faded snapshot of him and his brother, arms slung around each other in fatigues, grins wide under the relentless sun. This was before. Lost him out there. Wolves picked me up after. Gave me something to hold on to. Across the room, the other patrons had trickled out, leaving behind half-eaten plates and uneasy whispers. Old Man Hargrove, the mill foreman who'd nodded at Roy earlier that week, lingered at the door, his raincoat dripping. He eyed the bikers with the town's habitual suspicion. Leather and engines synonymous with trouble in these parts. Stories of bar fights and midnight runs fueling the gossip that kept folks locked behind screen doors. "You lot stirring something?" he muttered to Sarah as she cleared a table, his voice pitched low but carrying. Sarah paused, her rag twisting in her hands. "They just helped." Roy was out of line. Her words hung there, fragile as the steam from the grill. Hargrove snorted, shaking his head. "Helped? Looks like trouble to me. Sheriff's gonna hear about this." He shuffled out into the dusk, the bell jingling like a judgment bell. Outside, the lot was emptying, but a few wolves stayed, their bikes forming a loose guard under the sodium lamps. The town saw them as invaders, rough men on roaring machines, disrupting the fragile peace of payroll checks and church suppers. But Jax knew better. The judgment was a mirror, reflecting back the fears people buried under polite nods. As night fell, the diner glowed like a lone beacon off the highway, the rain now a steady patter that muffled the world. Ellie finally picked up her pencil, sketching idly. A road stretching into fog, wolves silhouetted against it. Jax watched from afar, his mind drifting to the trailer park down the way. He'd seen the signs before. The way Sarah flinched at loud voices, the hollows under Ellie's eyes that spoke of nights without rest. It mirrored his own regrets, the times he'd ridden past broken homes without stopping, convincing himself it wasn't his fight. But tonight, with the Brotherhood arrayed around him, that isolation cracked. He caught Tommy's eye, a silent signal passing between them, the kind forged in foxholes and funeral rides. Sarah approached then, sliding a plate of pie toward Jax, her hand steadier now. On the house, for stepping in. Her voice was soft, gratitude laced with fear of what came next. Jax took the fork, but his gaze held hers. We don't leave folks hangin', not when it's family gettin' hurt. The word family landed heavy, stirring something in her, a flicker of hope, or maybe just exhaustion. She nodded, glancing at Ellie. He's always been like that. Worse since the mill laid off half the crew. But the bruises, they don't stop. The door burst open again, not with Roy's fury, but with the sheriff's deputy, a lanky kid named Harlan who'd grown up 2 trailers over. He scanned the room, badge glinting under the lights, radio crackling faintly at his hip. Heard there was trouble, he said, eyes narrowing on the wolves. Roy Miller called it in, said you bikers roughed him up, threatened him in front of his family. The accusation hung like smoke, the deputy shifting his weight, hand hovering near his holster out of habit more than intent. Jack set his fork down slowly, the clink echoing in the sudden quiet. The wolves straightened, but no one rose. Their stillness was their statement. No roughen up, Jax replied, voice level. Man grabbed the girl. We stepped between, that's all. Tommy nodded from his seat, the photo still out on the counter like evidence of a life beyond the patches. Harlan's gaze flicked to Ellie, then Sarah, noting the spilled coffee stains on the floor, the way Ellie's arm cradled close. Sarah stepped forward, her chin lifting. It's true. They didn't touch him. Roy, he lost his temper. The deputy sighed, rubbing his jaw, the weight of small-town protocols pressing on him. He knew Roy's reputation, the bar tabs, the domestics filed and forgotten, but the wolves were outsiders, easy to pin blame on. Folks are talking. Say you stormed in like a gang. Mill workers are spooked. The judgment was there, unspoken. Bikers equal chaos, no matter the truth. Ellie looked up then, her voice small but clear. They protected us. The words cut through, simple as a sketch line, drawing Harlan's eyes. He saw it then, the tremble in her hand, the relief in Sarah's stance, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor of duty. All right, he muttered, jotting a note. I'll talk to Roy, but stay clear, you hear? He left with a nod, the door swinging shut behind him, rain swallowing his footsteps. The diner settled into a hush, the wolves exchanging looks that spoke volumes. Jax felt the pull stronger now, the moral thread tightening around them all. Outside, the engines hummed faintly, a reminder that the Brotherhood's justice wasn't loud or legal. It was the quiet stand, the refusal to let silence bury the broken. Ellie met Jax's eyes across the room, her sketch half-formed, a girl on a bike, riding toward light. In that gaze, the first threads of trust wove in, fragile but real. But the night was young, and Roy's threats lingered like exhaust in the air, promising shadows yet to come. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The neon sign outside Millie's diner flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting erratic pools of red and blue across the rain-slicked lot. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling grease and fresh coffee. The storm's patter on the roof now a monotonous whisper that lulled the edges of exhaustion. Ellie traced the outline of the girl on her sketch, hair whipping in an imagined wind, the bike beneath her, a sleek shadow cutting through uncertainty. Her arm still ached where Roy's fingers had pressed, a dull throb that echoed the pulse in her temples. But the pencil moved steady now, each line a small rebellion against the fear that had coiled in her gut for years. Jack stood by the window, his reflection fragmented in the glass, arms crossed over his chest, as if holding back the tide of memories. The deputy's visit had stirred the silt, dredging up old ghosts. The time the wolves had pulled a buddy from a burning wreck on Route 80, only to face the cops' assumptions of foul play, their leather branded as evidence of guilt. He rubbed the scar on his knuckles, a jagged line from shrapnel that had saved his life, but taken pieces of his soul. Turning, he caught Sarah's eye as she wiped down the counter for the third time, her movements precise but futile, like trying to erase the day's stains with a single cloth. "You need to talk to someone," Jack said quietly, stepping closer, his voice threading through the low murmur of the remaining wolves. They were down to a dozen now, the others scouting the perimeter or nursing smokes under the awning, their bikes a silent sentinel against the encroaching dark. Sarah paused, her rag stilling, the fluorescent light hollowing her cheeks. She glanced at Ellie, then back, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Who? The sheriff? He turns a blind eye every time Roy throws a fit, says it's domestic, and moves on." The word domestic landed bitter, laced with the unspoken tally of nights spent icing bruises, whispering reassurances to a daughter who pretended to sleep. Tommy slid off his stool, joining them, his boots scuffing softly on the floor. He pulled a chair out for Sarah, a gesture small but deliberate, the wood creaking under his weight as he sat. "We ain't the law," he said, his eyes steady on hers, the tattoos on his forearms shifting like maps of battles long buried. "But we've seen enough to know when a man's poison in his own. My ma went through it after Dad shipped out. Wouldn't leave till the neighbors dragged her to a shelter." He didn't elaborate, but the weight of it hung there, the echo of a woman who'd found her voice too late. The brother he'd lost not just to war, but to the fallout at home. Sarah's hand trembled as she set the rag down, her fingers brushing the edge of the counter, knuckles whitening. Ellie looked up from her drawing, the pencil hovering, caught in the web of their words. The diner felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the intimacy of confessions shared under duress. Outside, a wolf named Reyes, stocky, with a limp from a bar fight gone wrong years back, signaled from the lot, his silhouette framed by headlights. Jax nodded subtly, reading the urgency in the gesture. Roy hadn't slunk away quietly. Whispers from the mill crew had trickled in via a prospect on the edge of town. The man was rallying his buddies, the kind of roughnecks who punched clocks by day and egos by night, painting the wolves as interlopers threatening the order of things. The bell jingled softly as Reyes pushed inside, water dripping from his jacket, his face etched with the strain of holding back. "He's at the mill," he murmured to Jax, voice low enough that it blended with the rain. "Gathered 5-6 guys. Talking big about teaching us a lesson. Sheriff's in on it. Harlan's kin to one of them." Jax's jaw set, a flicker of contained fire in his eyes, but he kept it reined, the Brotherhood's code a tether against the storm inside. No rash moves. They'd learned that the hard way, after a run-in with rivals that left scars deeper than skin. Instead, he turned to Sarah, his tone measured. "You and the girl got a place to crash tonight? Our garage has a spare room, clean, no questions." Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting to Ellie, who had set her pencil down, the sketch unfinished, the girl's face half-shadowed. The offer hung between them, a lifeline tossed into churning waters, but trust was a fragile thing in a town that judged by appearances. "We can't drag you into this," she whispered, though her voice cracked with the lie of it. She wanted to, desperately, the way a drowning hand reaches for anything solid. Ellie stood then, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the wolf sketch folded carefully inside. "Mom," she said simply, the word carrying the weight of all the silences before. It was the first time she'd spoken up since the deputy left, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The wolves stirred, a subtle shift like gears engaging. Tommy rose, clapping Jax on the shoulder, the contact a silent affirmation. They'd all carried their own fractures, veterans piecing together lives from the debris of war, mechanics mending what the world broke, fathers haunted by what they'd lost. Jax thought of Lila again, her laughter echoing in the empty spaces of his rides, and felt the moral pull sharpen. To act wasn't just protection, it was atonement, a way to rewrite the endings that had slipped through their fingers. "It's done," he said to Sarah. Not a command, but an invitation, his eyes holding the quiet promise of men who'd chosen loyalty over letting go. As they gathered their things, Ellie zipping her bag with deliberate care, Sarah untying her apron with hands that finally steadied, the door swung open once more, this time with the growl of an approaching engine that wasn't one of theirs. Headlights pierced the gloom, sweeping across the lot like accusatory fingers. Roy's pickup, flanked by two rusted sedans, idled at the edge, silhouettes shifting inside. The rain muffled their shouts, but the intent cut clear. Confrontation, the kind that brewed in dive bars and festered into something uglier under the cover of night. Jax moved to the window, his frame blocking the light, the wolves forming up behind him without a word. No panic, just the unyielding resolve that had carried them through worse. Desert ambushes, roadside breakdowns, the slow bleed of grief. Ellie pressed close to her mother, the scent of spilled coffee and wet leather mingling in her nostrils, her heart a frantic drum. Outside, the standoff loomed, engines humming like held breaths, the town's judgment manifesting in the glare of those headlights. But in that charged silence, the Brotherhood stood firm, their compassion a shield forged in the fires of what they'd survived. The night deepened, pulling them toward the edge, where choices would test the bonds that held them, and the fragile hope blooming in a girl's half-drawn world. The headlights from Roy's pickup sliced through the rain like knives, pinning the diner in their glare, the engine's idle growl vibrating through the floorboards and into Ellie's bones. She stood frozen beside her mother, the backpack strap cutting into her shoulder, the unfinished sketch in her mind's eye. A girl on a bike, now chased by shadows that loomed larger than the storm. Sarah's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with a grip that was both anchor and plea, her breath shallow against the humid air thick with unspoken dread. The neon sign buzzed erratically overhead, casting fractured light across the wolves' faces, turning their expressions into masks of resolve, etched by years of hard choices. Jax didn't flinch, his silhouette steady against the window, the rain tracing rivulets down the glass like tears held back. He could feel the pull of the old instincts, the surge of adrenaline that had kept him alive in sand-swept patrols, the kind that whispered for swift justice in the face of threat. But he reined it in, remembering the cost of letting rage loose. A brother lost to prison bars after a brawl that started over less. The Brotherhood splintered, until Jax pieced it back with quiet talks around dying fires. "Hold," he murmured to the men behind him, his voice a low anchor in the rising tension. Tommy nodded, his hand resting lightly on the counter, close to where a forgotten butter knife lay, not as a weapon, but a reminder of restraint. Outside, the doors of the sedans creaked open, spilling 3 figures into the downpour. Mill workers, their flannel shirts darkened by rain, faces twisted in the loyalty of shared grievances. Roy stepped out last, his bulk silhouetted against the truck's high beams, a crowbar glinting in his hand like an extension of his fury. He shouted something lost to the wind, the words muddled but the intent clear. Reclaim what he saw as his, the fragile control that kept his world from unraveling. The wolves shifted, Reyes cracking his knuckles softly, the sound like distant thunder, while another, an older rider named Cal, with a prosthetic leg from Nam, limped to the door without hurry, his eyes scanning the lot with the calm of a man who'd faced worse than barroom toughs. Ellie pressed closer to Sarah, the scent of her mother's diner soap, faint lavender under grease, mingling with the metallic tang of fear in her throat. "We should go," she whispered, but her feet rooted, drawn to the wolves' unyielding line. Jax turned slightly, catching her gaze through the glass's distortion, his nod subtle but steady, a silent vow that pierced the chaos. It stirred something in her, a warmth against the chill seeping through the walls, reminding her of the stories Sarah told in hushed tones on bad nights, of grandfathers who'd stood against floods, neighbors who'd shared what little they had. These men, judged as outlaws by the town's narrow gaze, embodied that now, their leather a badge of the compassion society overlooked. The confrontation built slow, like pressure in a faulty engine. Roy advanced first, his boots splashing through puddles, the crowbar swinging loose at his side. "You think you can waltz in and take my family?" he bellowed, voice cracking on the edges, the rain masking the tremor beneath. His companions fanned out, one clutching a tire iron, another a length of chain that rattled like loose chains in the wind. They were the forgotten edges of the mill town, laid-off hands nursing beers and bitterness, seeing the wolves as the spark to ignite their own smoldering resentments. Harlan, the deputy, wasn't among them, but his absence felt complicit, the law's blind eye turning toward the easy narrative of biker invasion. Jax pushed the door open, stepping into the drizzle without a jacket, water beating on his beard like unshed grief. The cool air hit him sharp, carrying the ozone bite of the storm and the faint exhaust from idling bikes. The other wolves followed in pairs, forming a loose arc across the porch, engines revving softly in the background, a chorus that hummed with restrained power, not aggression. Tommy stayed inside with Sarah and Ellie, his presence a quiet bulwark, murmuring to the girl, "Breathe steady. We've got the line." Ellie nodded, her hand tightening on her mother's, watching through the streaked window as the standoff unfolded, the rain blurring the edges into a watercolor of menace and mercy. "You're done here, Roy," Jack said, his words carrying clear over the patter, even and unyielding as the highway asphalt. He didn't raise his voice, didn't posture. It was the tone of a man who'd stared down mortality and chosen words over fists. Roy halted a few yards out, water streaming from his hair, eyes wild with the mix of alcohol and outrage. "Family's mine to handle. You leathernecks stay out." But his gaze flickered to the circle of bikes, the 36 strong now fully arrayed, headlights forming a perimeter that glowed like fireflies in the gloom. One rider, a quiet mechanic named Lena. No, wait. All men in this pack, but Lena was the memory of Jax's sister, tough as nails, who'd patched his wounds after the war. The thought grounded him, turning rage to resolve. The mill workers hesitated, their bravado fracturing under the collective stare. One shifted his weight, chain dangling limp, whispering to Roy, "These guys ain't playin'. Sheriff's not coming quick." Roy's face contorted, the crowbar rising halfway, a muffled curse escaping as he lunged forward, not at Jax, but toward the door, toward Ellie. The move ignited the air. Cal intercepted with a sidestep, his cane tapping the ground like a warning shot, while Reyes blocked the path, arms open. No blows landed, but the scuffle was there, pushing, shoving, the wet slap of hands on jackets, signs of struggle swallowed by the rain. Jax grabbed Roy's arm, not twisting but holding firm, his grip a vice of compassion wrapped in steel. "Walk away. For her sake." Roy wrenched free, staggering back, breath heaving, the fight draining from him like water from a punctured tire. His eyes met Jax's, and in that suspended moment, something passed. A flicker of the man beneath the monster. The boy who'd once fixed bikes in his father's garage before the bottle and the layoffs twisted him. He dropped the crowbar, the metal clanging against asphalt, echoing into the night. "This ain't right," he muttered, more to himself, turning to his truck as his companions melted back into their cars, engines coughing to life. The convoy peeled out, taillights fading into the highway's black maw, leaving only ripples in the puddles and the acrid scent of burnt rubber. Inside, Ellie exhaled, the tension uncoiling in her chest like a spring released. Sarah pulled her close, tears mixing with rain on her face, whispering thanks that felt too small for the shield that had formed around them. Jax returned, dripping, his shirt clinging cold to his skin. But his eyes held a quiet light, the satisfaction of a moral line held, not crossed. The wolves reconvened in the lot, low voices discussing watches for the night, their brotherhood a web of loyalty that caught the falling pieces of lives like theirs. As the rain eased to mist, Jax lingered by the door, watching Ellie resume her sketch. The girl's figure now clearer, riding beside a wolf pack under clearing skies. The confrontation had escalated, risks laid bare. But in the quiet that followed, compassion whispered louder than the storm's retreat, binding them all in the slow forge of redemption. Yet the shadows of retaliation lingered, the town's whispers growing, pulling them deeper into the fray where true tests awaited. The mist hung low over the highway as dawn cracked the sky, a pale gray light filtering through the pines that flanked the road to the wolves' garage. The air carried the sharp bite of wet earth and cooling engines, the kind of scent that clung to your skin after a night without sleep. Jax rode point on his old shovel head, the rumble steady under him. Ellie and Sarah tucked in the sidecar of Tommy's rig behind, their forms huddled against the chill. The 36 bikes stretched out in a loose formation, not a convoy of show but a quiet escort, headlights cutting through the fog like threads of resolve. No one spoke much. The confrontation at the diner had left echoes in their bones, the scuffle's muffled sounds replaying in the silences between revs. Ellie gripped the sidecar's edge, her knuckles pale, the backpack pressed against her chest like a shield. The motion blurred the world, trailer parks giving way to rusted silos, the town shrinking in the side mirror until it was just a smudge of regret. She'd never left on a whim like this, not without Roy's barked orders or Sarah's tearful goodbyes to a shift. But last night, after the crowbar clanged to the ground, something had shifted inside her, a crack in the wall she'd built from sketches and stolen moments. Watching Jax hold Roy without striking, his grip firm but his eyes steady with something like pity, had planted a seed of wonder. What if protection didn't come with strings, didn't demand silence in return? The garage loomed at the end of a gravel drive, a squat concrete bunker ringed by chain link and overgrown weeds, the wolf emblem spray-painted faded but fierce on the rolling door. It smelled of oil and solder inside, workbenches cluttered with carburetors and half-rebuilt frames, the hum of a fluorescent tube flickering like a hesitant heartbeat. Sarah helped Ellie settle into the spare room, a converted office with a cot, a threadbare quilt, and a window overlooking the lot where bikes would park like sleeping guardians. "It's not much," Sarah murmured, smoothing the blanket with hands that still trembled faintly, her eyes tracing her daughter's face for signs of the fear that had shadowed them both. Jax lingered in the doorway, his jacket slung over one shoulder, water from the mist beating on his boots. He didn't crowd them. Instead, he nodded toward a stack of clean shirts on the shelf. Tommy's ma sent those over last run. They fit loose, but warm. His voice was gravel soft, carrying the weight of miles ridden in solitude before the wolves became his compass. Ellie met his gaze, her fingers brushing the wolf sketch in her bag, the one she'd finished in the diner's dying light. The girl now riding with the pack, not fleeing alone. "Thanks," she said, the word small but sincere, hanging in the air like the first raindrop before a storm. Outside, the Brotherhood gathered in the lot, engines ticking as they cooled, steam rising from exhaust pipes into the morning haze. Tommy wiped down his bike with a rag, his movements methodical, but his mind churned with the night's fallout. Word from a prospect at the mill. Roy was holed up, nursing a bruised ego, and rallying more than whispers now. Talk of calling in favors from county boys who owed him for past fixes. The sheriff's office had logged a vague report, Harlan's handwriting scrawled across it. painting the wolves as aggressors in a disturbance. The town buzzed with it already, payphones ringing in kitchens, the judgment settling like dust on reputations long tarnished. Jax joined them, leaning against his shovel head, the metal still warm under his palm. "We hold the line," he said, his eyes scanning the tree line as if threats hid in the shadows. Reyes nodded, lighting a smoke, the flame briefly illuminating the scar across his cheek from a chain whipping years back, before Jax pulled the club from that spiral. "For the girl?" Cal asked, his prosthetic tapping the gravel rhythmically, a habit from nights pacing hospital halls after his own daughter's cancer took her. Jax paused, the question stirring the ache he'd buried under leather and loyalty. "For all of us. Seen too many walk away when it mattered." Inside, Sarah stepped out to the main bay, where tools hung like silent sentinels on pegboards scarred by use. The wolves worked without fanfare, Reyes torquing a bolt, Tommy checking fluids, but their glances toward the office door spoke volumes. Sarah approached Jax, her apron traded for a borrowed flannel that swallowed her frame. "Why us?" she asked, voice barely above the whir of a fan. "You don't know us. Could have ridden on." Jack set down a wrench, wiping his hands on a rag stained with grease, his eyes distant for a beat, fixed on a faded photo tacked to the wall. Him and Lila at a county fair, her small hand in his, cotton candy smearing her grin. "Lost my girl 5 years back," he said finally, the words measured, like gravel sifted slow. "Drunk driver. She was sketching birds on the porch when it happened, same age as Ellie now." The revelation landed soft but heavy, the air in the garage thickening with the shared breath of men who'd carried their own losses. Sarah's hand rose to her mouth, eyes widening with the understanding that clicked like a key in a lock. Jax wasn't just a writer. He was a father hollowed by absence, the road his penance, the wolves his way to fill the void with purpose. "Ellie's sketches. They remind me," he added, glancing toward the office. "Remind me we can still stand for something." The emotional turn rippled outward, binding the fragments. Tommy overheard, clapping Jax's shoulder with a nod that needed no words. His own brother's grave a fresh scar, the wolves the salve that kept infection at bay. Ellie emerged then, drawn by the quiet, her notebook under her arm. She caught the tail of Jax's words, her gaze flicking to the photo, seeing the echo of her own lines in the girl's forgotten smile. No one pressed. Instead, Cal offered her a stool, sliding over a half-eaten sandwich from the communal cooler. "Eat. Roads are long when you're running scared." She took it, the simple act, a bite of bread, the warmth of inclusion, unraveling the knot in her chest, tears pricking but unshed. But tension coiled tighter as midday approached, a rumble echoing from the highway. Not thunder, but engines, deliberate and closing. A scout radioed in, Roy's crew, doubled now, weaving through back roads with intent. The garage door rattled as Jax signaled to secure it, the wolves moving with practiced grace, no panic but a contained storm. Ellie watched from the window, heart thudding, the sketchbook open to the wolf pack now encircling the girl. Sarah pulled her back, but Jax knelt before them, his voice steady. "We face it together. No one's alone here." The words were a vow, awakening the Brotherhood's code deeper still. Protection not as duty, but as the quiet justice that mended what the world let break. As the rival engines grew louder, vibrating the concrete, Jax rose, the scar on his knuckles whitening with grip. The revelation had redefined them, not as outlaws judged by leather, but as men reclaiming humanity one stand at a time. Outside, the lot braced, rain clouds gathering anew, the moral suspense hanging like mist. How far would loyalty stretch before the confrontation cracked the fragile peace they'd forged? If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jax reach more people who still believe in humanity. The gravel crunched under the tires as Roy's convoy rolled into view. A ragged line of pickups and sedans kicking up mist from the damp earth, their headlights piercing the gathering clouds like accusatory stares. The air thickened with the low growl of engines, a discordant rumble that clashed against the steady hum of the wolves' bikes idling in the lot, a symphony of tension strung tight. Jack stood at the garage's open bay, his frame silhouetted against the fluorescent glow spilling from within, the scent of oil and rain mingling in his nostrils like a warning. He felt the weight of eyes on him, his brothers arrayed along the chain-link fence, hands loose but ready, faces etched with the quiet determination that had carried them through sandstorms and shattered alliances. Ellie peered from the office window, her breath fogging the glass, the unfinished sandwich forgotten on the workbench beside her. Sarah hovered close, one arm around her daughter's shoulders, the borrowed flannel scratching against her skin like unfamiliar armor. The revelation from moments ago still echoed in the space between them. Jax's loss laid bare, a bridge from his grief to their fear, turning strangers into something resembling kin. But now, as Roy's truck lurched to a halt at the lot's edge, kicking up pebbles that pinged against metal, that fragile connection tested against the raw edge of confrontation. Ellie's hand trembled on the sill, her mind flashing to the sketch in her notebook. The girl encircled by wolves, not cowering, but standing tall. If only lines on paper could hold back the shadows closing in. Roy emerged first, slamming his door with a force that reverberated through the ground, his silhouette bulkier in the dim light, flanked by 8 men now. Mill hands swollen with borrowed courage, their tools glinting dully, wrenches, pipes, the occasional bottle clutched like a talisman. The rain began in earnest, fat drops splattering the concrete, turning the lot into a mosaic of shallow pools that reflected the chaos overhead. "Come out, biker!" Roy bellowed, his voice cracking like thunder, laced with the slur of whatever he'd drowned his defeat in. He paced forward, eyes locked on the garage, ignoring the perimeter of bikes that formed an unspoken barrier. His companions muttered agreements, shifting their weight, the chain link rattling faintly as one tested it with a boot. Jax raised a hand, signaling his men to hold. The gesture simple but commanding, rain tracing cold paths down his neck into his collar. He stepped out alone, boots splashing through a puddle, the water seeping into his socks with a chill that grounded him. No rush, no bravado. Just the measured stride of a man who'd learned that true strength lay in the pause before the storm. Tommy flanked the door from inside, his silhouette visible to Ellie, a nod passing between them. "Stay put. We've got this." The wolves didn't shout back. Their silence was their retort, a wall built from shared scars, the kind that whispered of brothers pulled from wreckage, families mended in the quiet hours after fights. "You took what's mine," Roy snarled, as Jax neared the fence, close enough now for the whiskey on his breath to cut through the downpour. His face was a map of veins and shadows, the crowbar from last night replaced by a tire iron gripped white-knuckled. The men behind him fanned out, forming a ragged semicircle, their murmurs rising like steam from the wet ground. One, a lanky figure with a mill tattoo peeking from his sleeve, spat into the gravel, his eyes darting to the garage as if weighing the odds. The town had fed their fire, whispers at the bar about outsiders stealing jobs, disrupting the fragile order. The sheriff's vague warnings fueling the narrative that painted the wolves as predators rather than protectors. Jack stopped a few feet from the chain link, rain dripping from his beard, his eyes steady on Roy's. "No one's taken anything. The girl's safe, that's all." His voice carried low, even against the escalating patter, the words laced with the exhaustion of too many similar stands. He thought of Lila then, sharper than before, the way her small hand had slipped from his at the fair, how he'd ridden endless loops after, chasing the ghost of what he couldn't save. This wasn't vengeance. It was the echo of that failure, channeled into the moral code that bound the brotherhood. Shield the vulnerable. even if it meant facing the storm head-on. Roy laughed, a hollow bark swallowed by the rain, but his advance faltered, the tire iron dipping slightly. "Safe? With you lot? Folks know your kind. Trouble on two wheels." His companions echoed the sentiment, one banging his pipe against the fence with a metallic clang that set Ellie's teeth on edge inside. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching Jax's back, the way his shoulders squared not in anger, but resolve. Sarah pulled her away gently, toward the cot, but Ellie's feet resisted, drawn to the scene unfolding like a half-formed sketch coming to life. The wolves began to move then, not charging, but closing ranks along the perimeter, their boots synchronized in the mud, engines revving in unison. A deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the chain link like a heartbeat. The standoff stretched, taut as a bowstring, the rain sheeting down in veils that blurred faces and intentions. Roy lunged forward, tire iron raised, but Cal intercepted at the gate, his cane blocking the path with a solid thunk, the older man's eyes holding a lifetime of quiet defiance. A scuffle erupted, not a brawl of fists and fury, but a tangle of shoves and grapples, muffled grunts lost to the storm, signs of struggle rippling through the group like waves on disturbed water. Reyes took a swing from a pipe to the shoulder, staggering but holding, while Tommy burst from the garage to reinforce, his presence pulling two back with firm grips that spoke of restraint over retaliation. Jax reached Roy, not striking but pinning his arm against the fence, the metal links digging into fabric, rain mingling with sweat on their faces. "Enough," Jax growled, close enough to see the flicker in Roy's eyes, the crack in the facade, the man beneath unraveling. Roy twisted, elbow connecting with Jax's ribs in a dull thud that forced a sharp breath from him. But Jax held, whispering through gritted teeth, "Think of her. This ends it." The words pierced, Roy's struggle easing, the tire iron slipping from numb fingers to clatter in the mud. His companions wavered, the fight draining as the wolves' unity held unyielding, no blows landing that drew blood, just the exhaustion of wills clashing in the downpour. One by one, Roy's crew backed off, slinking to their vehicles, engines coughing to life amid curses and defeated mutters. Roy lingered last, chest heaving, rain washing the grime from his face, revealing eyes hollowed by regret's first stir. He met Jax's gaze, something unspoken passing, a shared recognition of paths diverged, the weight of choices that scarred deeper than skin. "She's all I got left," Roy muttered, voice breaking like the clouds overhead, before turning away, his truck's taillights fading into the mist-shrouded highway. The lot fell quiet save for the drip of water from eaves and the soft sighs of cooling engines. Jax leaned against the fence, breath ragged, the ache in his side a reminder of the cost. Inside, Ellie rushed to the door as he entered, dripping and weary, her notebook clutched like a talisman. "You okay?" she asked, voice small against the garage's hum. Jax nodded, managing a faint smile, the gesture cracking the tension like dawn through fog. Sarah pressed a towel into his hands, gratitude in her eyes, the air shifting with the subtle warmth of bonds forged in the fray. The wolves gathered, checking each other with nods and quiet words, no boasts, just the relief of lines held, compassion prevailing over chaos. But as the rain tapered to a drizzle, Jax felt the deeper truth settle. This protection wasn't just for Ellie. It was the redemption he'd chased on endless roads, the Brotherhood's loyalty a mirror to the family he'd lost, now extended to heal what was breaking. Ellie watched him, her sketch forgotten, seeing not the biker the town feared, but the father in mourning, his humanity shining through the storm's retreat. Yet whispers from the highway lingered, the town's judgment evolving into reluctant awe, pulling them toward one final reckoning where forgiveness might bloom from the mud. Word count, 872. The drizzle lingered like a hesitant farewell, turning the garage lot into a shimmering veil that softened the edges of the battered chain link and the bikes lined up like weary sentinels. Jax eased onto a workbench, the wood cool against his back, his ribs protesting with a sharp twinge as he peeled off his soaked shirt. The air inside hummed with the low murmur of the wolves tending to minor scrapes. Reyes flexing his shoulder, Cal polishing his cane with a rag that smelled of linseed oil. No one spoke of victories. The quiet was their language, laced with the faint drip of water from the rafters and the earthy scent of rain-soaked gravel seeping through the open bay. Ellie hovered in the doorway of the office, her notebook clutched against her chest, the pages slightly warped from the humidity. Sarah sat beside her on the cot, the quilt pulled tight around her knees, her eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion on Jax's face. The confrontation had ebbed. Roy's truck long vanished into the highway's curve, but the echo of it pulsed in the space between them. The muffled grunts of the scuffle, the rain's relentless drum masking what could have been worse. Ellie stepped forward, her sneakers silent on the concrete, and offered Jax a clean towel from the stack, her hand steady despite the tremor she'd hidden all night. "Here," she said, voice barely above the fan's whir, the gesture small but weighted, like the first line in a new sketch. Jax took it, his calloused fingers brushing hers, and for a moment, the garage fell still. He dabbed at his side, where a bruise bloomed dark under the skin, but his gaze held on Ellie, seeing not just the girl from the diner, but fragments of Lila in the set of her jaw, the quiet fire behind her shadowed eyes. The revelation from earlier hung unfinished, a thread pulling tighter now in the aftermath's hush. "You remind me of her," he said softly, nodding toward the faded photo on the wall. Lila's grin frozen in time, cotton candy pink on her lips. "My daughter. She drew too, endless pages of roads and animals that could fly. Said the wolves in her stories always protected the lost ones." Sarah leaned forward, her breath catching, the borrowed flannel slipping from her shoulder. "You never said. I mean, after what you told us, I thought—" She trailed off, the pieces aligning. Jax's watchful eyes at the diner, the way he'd knelt without touching, offering space laced with understanding. It wasn't random kindness. It was a father's ghost guiding his hand. The brotherhood of vessel, for the grief he'd channeled into something unbreakable. Ellie sat on the stool beside him, opening her notebook to the wolf pack sketch. The girl now fully formed, writing not alone, but woven into the shadows that guarded her. "This one's for you," she murmured, tearing the page free with careful fingers, the paper whispering as it separated. "For standing there." The act pierced the air, simple as rain on tin, but it awakened the deeper truth that redefined the storm they'd weathered. Jax's hand trembled slightly as he took the drawing, the lines blurring in his vision, not from pain, but from the flood of memory. Lila had been 16 too, sketching in that porch swing when the screech of tires ended it all. The drunk driver, a local with a badge's protection, had walked free, leaving Jax to ride the blame into isolation until the wolves dragged him back, their loyalty a balm on wounds that festered. But Ellie wasn't just a echo. In her sketches, her quiet defiance, she was a second chance, not to rewrite the past, but to shield a future from the same unraveling. The town saw bikers as brutes, hearts hardened by engines and exile. But here, in the grease-streaked light, Jax's mourning stripped the stereotype bare, revealing a man whose strength was forged in loss, extended now to two souls teetering on the edge. Tommy approached then, a thermos of coffee in hand, steam curling like unspoken prayers. He poured for them all, the rich aroma cutting through the damp chill, and settled on a crate nearby, his tattoos glistening faintly under the fluorescence. "Roy's done," he said, voice low, relaying the scout's update. The man had holed up alone, the crew scattering under the weight of their own doubts, the sheriff's vague report buried under Harlan's reluctant admission of the truth. No charges stuck. The wolves' stand had been clean, their restraint a testament that silenced the whispers turning to reluctant nods around town, but Tommy's eyes lingered on Jack's, the bond between them deepening with the shared revelation. A veteran recognizing another's hidden battles, the pack's compassion, the quiet justice where law faltered. As afternoon light slanted through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the tools and half-rebuilt frames, Sarah rose, pulling Ellie into a hug that spoke of thresholds crossed. "We can't stay forever," she whispered, but her tone held no rush, the garage's walls feeling less like shelter and more like home in the warmth of their vigil. Jax folded the sketch carefully, tucking it into his wallet beside Lila's photo, the two images side by side, a bridge from grief to grace. The wolves drifted in, sharing sandwiches from the cooler, their laughter low and genuine, stories weaving of rides that mended more than machines. Ellie joined in, her pencil scratching idly on a scrap, the lines flowing freer now, capturing the faces around her. Not as guardians from afar, but family claimed in the fray. Outside, the mist lifted, revealing a sky bruised but clearing, the highway stretching empty and inviting. Jack stepped into the lot, the gravel crunching underfoot, and felt the evolution settle. From the isolation of endless roads to this, compassion rooted in brotherhood, redemption in the act of holding the line. Ellie followed, notebook in hand, her arm no longer cradled but swinging loose, the ache fading into memory. Sarah joined them, the three forming a quiet circle as the wolves revved engines softly, a farewell hum that promised returns. No grand speeches, just the shared silence of lives intertwined, the moral arc bending toward light. In the days that followed, Roy sought help. A counselor's door cracked open by the mirror Jax had held up, forgiveness budding tentative from the ruins. The town shifted, stories evolving from judgment to quiet awe, the road wolves no longer shadows but threads in the fabric of survival. Ellie sketched on, her birds now soaring with wolves below, symbols of the courage that bloomed where brutality once loomed. Jax rode again, the road less lonely, Lila's spirit riding beside in every turn. Strength wasn't the roar of engines or the grip of fists. It was the hand extended in silence, the loyalty that bound outcasts into something sacred, the forgiveness that healed what silence broke. In the hum of distant highways and the scent of rain-washed asphalt, they found it, human hearts beating steady, proving that redemption waited not in judgment, but in the choice to protect. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of the Road Wolves stand. See you in the next one.